Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dropping in Surf Show. My name is Rob Case, and I am a paddling technique coach located in Northern California. And today on the show, we have a special guest. Her name is Daphne Teh, and Daphne is a data scientist and currently a professor at Bocconi University, Italy's top business university, with a decade of experience turning data into business insights through consulting at Accenture in her past. So she has a business undergrad from NYU, completed a PhD in management at INSEAD, and she's grown her expertise in machine learning and AI. So she has lived in 4 different continents and spends her free time surfing. And our conversations recently have shown, her passion on harnessing the power of data to revolutionize the world of surfing, or at least get involved in it. So today we're going to dive into how data science can get involved in, or is currently involved in surfing, and how that could help us as surfers, and how it could help surf businesses. So I hope you enjoy it. You're a data scientist. Maybe
Mhm.
explain to us really quickly, well, on a light way, what data science is, and give us some examples of how the world uses it, not just surfing, but kind of, what is it used for?
Yeah, okay. So I feel like data science right now is such a broad term and it can encompass working with data to do a variety of different things from things that are more simple to things that are a lot more kind of advanced and challenging.
Yeah.
So on so I guess if we were to break it down really simply, data science right now is this really broad term for how people and organizations work with data that's available to them. And this can encompass like a wide variety of different data types.
Okay.
That's data and how we think of it conventionally, like numbers, metrics we get out of a database, like financials, demographic attributes, things like that. And then there's also like the more complex types of data that is unstructured and that we have a lot more available as a byproduct of the presence of technology in our life. So things like video data, text, images, things like that. We're starting to have models that allow us to work with this on a really, really large scale. So the different types of use cases we can use for this data ranges from things that is more directed towards questions like, like how do we know, what types of people engage in a certain type of behavior, or what types of organizations behave a certain way, or when something happens, right? So
Mhm.
that's one bucket of data there. One type of problems there. And then you have like problems that relate a bit more to like predicting outcomes. So more future oriented. And then I guess in terms of the different types of use cases we have available, especially from like a business standpoint, driving outcomes like customer segmentation, things like building recommended systems. So like understanding what types of products or what types of like videos to recommend people. That's one example of a recommended system. Things like customer segmentation, like understanding like how your social media and how like the different types of um the different ways in which you craft your social media, how that attracts views. That's one other outcome that
Mhm.
we can use. And then there's also this whole other bucket, or like things like analyzing videos or being able to detect like anomalies around you. That's another set of use case scenarios.
Wow.
And then just like if you were to step back from like business oriented outcomes, data science can also just be used to like process data, right? So things like how do you, if you have a ton of images, like you know, how to categorize what types of images do you have in this giant folder that you have, right?
Right.
Or if you have like thousands and thousands of videos, like what types of videos are in there or how much time per video do you spend on a certain topic.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of different things you you can do with that.
Yeah. Would you say
So
that data is like the ingredients of food, and you can make a lot of different dishes out of the data that's presented to you? You don't even have to eat the dishes, the recipes, but you can take photos of them, you can use them for business, you can use them for personal. Is that a kind of an okay analogy to think about what data science is? It's like almost like a chef of sorts.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So for example, yeah, you just need as like having access to high quality data,
Okay.
and it is really useful for being able to produce a variety of different high quality meals. And
Right.
then I guess it's then really useful for the people, the organizations to have like their hat on to
Mm.
think about like how can I ask good questions with the data I have, so I can optimize myself, my business, and all that. And so it's also like, in my opinion, like being a good data scientist or using data science well also involves like having an inquiring mind and being able to like question, how do I use this like tomato? How do I use this tomato, for example,
Right.
to do as many creative different things as possible that ends up being actually really useful for me and the people around me.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that's a really good point because I think in today's world, it's everybody knows how to use a tomato historically, but I think what data science and AI especially is doing today is, okay, well, how can we use a tomato that's totally different than how we've used it in the past? Would you say?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And also I think like with just the ridiculous amount of like tools and like models that are available, you're able to use this tomato to like different degrees of like effectiveness,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is really cool. And like, I mean, I think we hear of all these like run-of-the-mill, like large language models or all these like really big tools that we can use. Like obviously OpenAI is like a big one.
Yeah.
But then also depending on your use case, there are now all these different really niche models that really allow you to like optimize and improve the performance of whatever you're trying to do, you
Yeah.
know?
Would you say that you said you really need good data, right? You were very specific about that, having good data or good ingredients. Is it the outcome that you're trying to seek drives you towards what is defined as good data? Or does data come first and then you can create the outcomes from it? Does that question make sense? How do
Yeah,
you look at it as a data scientist? Is it what is this person or this business's problem? Now I go look for the data that can help me assess how to solve that, or is it they come to you with here's all this data, what can you make of it?
yeah. So I guess there are different steps to the problem, right? So I think one thing that I think is useful to keep in mind, is a data scientist is not a magician. So
Come
I say this
on.
a lot to people because I think sometimes, especially with what we have in the media, it sounds like data science is this like magic wand, and as long as you know how to use it, like I will be able to churn out, or anyone will be able to churn out all these different insights or all these different like tools for you to use. And so there's like a variety of different like issues that come up in the on the spectrum. Okay, so the first one is like just it depends on what the problem the company is trying to address. So for example, if they're trying to like market size, I'm coming up with this one right now. Let's say they're trying to market size whether it makes sense for them to enter a certain geography to set up a surf school, right? There are a variety of different things I can do for them, such as like scraping the data off online or identifying different metrics or different factors that could drive whether there's potential for, whether it's worth their while to have a business case. And in that case, it's fine because a lot of data that's available is currently available like online or in the real world, right?
Mhm.
If a company comes to me and they're like, hey, Daphne, we really want you to like understand our customer base. We want to know like who comes to our school, for example, but then they don't have like actual data on their customers.
Right.
then that would be a problem because I wouldn't be able it's like coming to me and being like, hey, we want you to cook a meal.
Yeah.
But then I was like, there's no food,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, totally. Right.
so then that's an issue, right? Because then that's a question that's very tailored specifically to their organization.
Right.
And there are different, depending on the problem and depending on the organization, firms are on different levels of the spectrum as to what they can do, right? Because they need to have data in order to drive a certain outcome.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And I guess to give you another example, because you asked the question specifically around like being able to this question of like good quality data,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I think something we often say in data science is like garbage in, garbage out,
Right.
you know? And so like some of these models are actually really, really sensitive to the data that you're feeding into it. And so if you're just, scraping everything and throwing all the data points or all the different features and variables into this model, without like considering whether these variables actually have an impact on the outcome you're trying to analyze, then that doesn't really help you.
Right.
Or I think something else is like there's some for certain models for them to work well, you actually really want to also intervene in the process. So having a human involved in like labeling the data, for example, is really useful because that really helps the model understand what you're trying to do.
Hmm.
Whereas if you just throw the data at the model, there's variation as to the degree of accuracy that it will spit out. And I think a lot of it also depends, like whether that matters, also depends on how precise the person using the output wants,
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
So the way I think about it, using the surf school example that you brought up,
Yeah.
if they're capturing hair color as a
Yeah.
data point,
Yeah.
well, it has no bearing on, whether they're going to take more or less, fewer lessons, correct? So
Yeah.
it's not really, maybe hair color is great for another business, but not necessarily for the surf school. So, what might be considered bad data for one business might be good data for another. Is that a good way to
Yeah.
kind of put it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's almost both. So it's not, I guess to answer my question, it's not a chicken or the egg. It's not a data first and outcome second. It's really blending the two. It's knowing what's problem you want to solve, as you mentioned, and
Yeah.
identifying how to capture the data that's going to help get the analysis for that solution, or that to get at least more questions to ask.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Like I think a practice that I adopted during my PhD was like when you're collecting data, just collect as many things as possible, just
Mhm.
because you never know when you're going to need it. And especially when the amount of effort it takes you to, get that extra data point is low, just collect it and keep it on hand, but then like be very careful around like what variables you include when you're actually like doing your analysis. So that
Yeah.
gives you options to like play around with things and you could use the same data for a different question or a different problem later.
Yeah, yeah. So on the same lines of using it for businesses, and actually pro surfers could use this as well because they're marketing themselves, having
Yeah,
insights into, you know, what, what videos are being viewed, or what photos are being viewed, or how they come across, what shirt they wear, what clothing they wear, that sort of thing. Um, and just kind of bridging this conversation into surfing. Other than, I know that, actually, I'm going to pull up, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull up
yeah. Sure.
what you sent me, the project.
Oh yeah. That's
Um,
like a passion project of mine since I spent so much
yeah.
time online anyways.
Yeah. So maybe you can just kind of walk us through this really quick about what you did. Was this for Kale?
Yeah, I'm sending it to him. Yeah.
Okay, great, great. So for
Yeah.
Kale Brock, for those of you guys that don't know, Kale Brock is a surf coach online. Great, great videos. And you want to give us maybe the highlights of this and tell me where to scroll or highlight?
Okay, sure. So I guess to give context, the way in which so I did this project for Kilbrook, which was kind of part of a broader project of mine since I clearly enjoy surfing a lot, and I'm a data scientist. So I scrape all this data from like I think 41 or 44 like surfing YouTube channels. And I was in touch with Kale, and so I was like, okay, well, I'll send you a couple of insights. And so there are different things I did with the data I had pulled. So maybe the first one to start on is the cross-channel analysis over here, since that's broad. So I had like 41 surfing YouTube channels. There are a bunch of different categories, like obviously big brands. I had like 15 pro surfers in there, artificial wave pools, so on and so forth. But then I had about like I had like six training companies in here. And so what I did was the first step I took was to get some kind of like baseline understanding of how how the YouTube views of these different channels behave. Because what I discovered was each category has kind of its own behavior. It's kind of like its own animal. On one hand, the people who produce these videos tend to produce rather different types of videos, in terms of length, frequency, content in itself. But then there's also variation within category. So the first thing I did was I focused on the surf training channels. And what we see over here with the cross-channel analysis was I kind of benchmarked different channels against each other. And I can go into it much deeper, but these are like the few ones I condensed. One of the things that really jumped out to me was kind of the frequency and the volume of videos that each channel produced over time. And I think Kill's one is the one that's really thick over here, right? The really thick dark line.
Right.
Uh, yeah, and you can see that, he is actually he's actually pretty consistent over this time period. And he's one of like the more frequent posters. His
Hmm.
line is like quite a bit higher than the rest. And this contrasts quite a bit with like I guess those at the bottom where it's relatively flat and like the amplitude of the wave or the graph
Hmm.
is a little less thick. So that was like one big thing I did. And then the other thing I did was I really kind of focused the rest of the analysis on things like, what's the average count per video, because that gives us an overall sense of, is the health of the channel doing well or not, right?
Hmm.
But then the other kind of variable that I actually think is really useful to consider, and I think often gets overlooked, is that of variation of view count or the standard deviation,
Yeah.
because this tells us how much range there is within this channel. And ideally, what we want to see is a channel that is having high performance and it's having low variation, right? So like a pro surfer, you're doing well consistently all the time, instead of being like this person who has like one great wave and like, lots of not so great ones.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, so I did that for him to just kind of help him benchmark himself within this broad category.
Right.
And I also like kind of tried to assess which competitors were the most similar to him, just because like the people or the organizations that are the most similar to you tends to be the one that people will also seek out, right? So that's your
Yeah.
similar to you. And then if we scroll up, and then I did a bit more analysis that was specific to his channel. So if we go to the top part of the dark blue section, yeah. So the next thing I did was, so these parts are just really about getting like a baseline understanding of what of how his channel behaves now. Now that I've established the industry or like the category baseline, now I'm looking at his. And so there are a couple of like key things, like, his channel is one of the older ones around. It's been around for 12 years. He has about 466 channels. I did a couple of things in there as well, where I looked at the different titles just to have a sense of the different types of videos he produced. And obviously you could do this across a much larger database, and that would be useful as well. And I also identified like the top most viewed videos, because, that could be useful for seeing a trajectory for what people liked.
Yeah.
And then I did things like extracting the locations mentioned in the titles because I imagine that could attract people's attention and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, so that could be used. That's like an example of and I did all this actually mainly from just looking at the titles of the YouTube videos. So
Wow.
you
Yeah.
pick one ingredient and like extract all sorts of different things from there.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, so I did for example, in order to get the locations, I used like AI essentially to be able to detect the different types of locations that were mentioned and to be able to deal with like spelling differences and things like that to
Yeah.
and yeah, and the same thing with people's names as well. So that
Yeah, I
made things
saw that. That's so interesting that the location and names, I can see how Kale could really use this to help him refine how he puts up videos and how he names them and really put some reasoning behind. Because honestly, when I put up a video, it's just like, well, I don't know, maybe this will work. And
yeah.
up to this point, that's kind of how it's been. And yeah, there's analytics and YouTube has analytics, but nothing like this. This is fantastic. So
Yeah,
this
no,
is, yeah, I was gonna say this is a deep, deep, and this is like, would you consider this is light analysis for you, or this is fairly deep in terms of the time? I mean, you probably put a bunch of time into this.
yeah, it did take me some time, but I don't think I wouldn't consider it. So because of the availability of certain tools, that helps a lot
Mm.
with like detecting the names of the locations, for example.
Right.
So it wasn't, I would say there are different pieces to it. So I think with like I categorizing the different YouTube titles, that
Hmm.
was a little bit more like involved. Detecting the locations, there are models for that, so that wasn't too difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was actually I don't know, I enjoy crunching data.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Tell me about
I
so these
personally invested.
factors. I love variables. I love math. We had a good conversation about this. These are the
Yeah.
factors that you're searching for on these, right? Is that what we're looking at here? The
Uh,
insights?
Yeah, so what I did over here was so with the one in between, just before I go to this
Oh,
section,
yes,
I
of
did
course. Sorry.
yeah, no, just I'll just spend a little bit of time on this one. The other thing I did was I thought about timing a lot just because if you post at different times of the year, that could affect viewership or like I just that was just another set of analysis I did because that was available from YouTube and also along with time then you would think about things like posting time of the year, posting on day,
Hmm.
um, frequency of posting,
Hmm.
time between posts. So there's lots of features you can extract from there.
Yeah,
Um,
posting warm water surf spots in the middle of winter in the Northern Hemisphere.
yeah, that people like super excited, right? Because like I missed that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so timing I think matters. And then what I did over here when you talked about like insights when you scrolled down.
Hmm.
So in this particular section, what I did was how I talked about like just getting as much data and creating having as much variables as possible, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So actually, this short list of factors over here came out of like a much, much longer list of factors I had. And then I kind of
I can imagine. I mean, and for the viewers that are just listen or the listeners, there's a factor like called video length, days between vids, location mention, person mention, just the month of May, June, review. These are just keywords, right? Van life. Van life is one of
yeah.
them. Barrels is one of them. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I had like a ton of different variables that I like, extracted that was specific to Kale's channel. And the reason why I did that was because the nature of Kale's channel is probably dramatically different from other channels. So he has a good amount of van life in there. You don't see this on every surfing channel, right? So
Mm, right.
that's why he has a variable there. And so I had a bunch of different things. And I essentially what we have up here is a short list on things that I could see drove outcomes. So like video length is a key variable. And
Hmm.
what you find is actually the optimal video length for different channels is not the same. So you always
Yeah.
want something that's very like tailored to you.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, within a certain category, there may be more of a trend, but you want something that's like specific to you because you're going to attract a certain type of audience. So you want to know the ideal video length for that audience,
Yeah.
right? So I did that. And then like days between videos is another one. Just because you don't want to overload people with content. So that's another factor that I put in. And I think this is where the whole thing I was saying earlier about questioning and wondering and just like having lots of questions is I think where that comes in because that actually comes from one field that I extracted from YouTube, and then you can just come out of all these different variables
Hmm.
uh, based on that because you're just wondering whether it makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one example. Location mention, person mentions another one. Like the month, there are obviously a lot more in there. And then the same thing with reviews, training, van life, because I figured the category um, would make a difference in terms of the types of content that people seek from his channel.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, in the broader corpus, one of the things I found was like location mention, like for example, within one category of variable, right? Like let's say location mention, and I just did this deep dive on all these different YouTube channels where people move around and like the locations mentioned, and I grouped them. So I did this one analysis, it's not here. But you would find that like certain locations just attract a lot more people.
Yeah.
So for example, like I think like Hawaii is one big one, one
Yeah.
big category. A lot of people, Hawaii and like pipeline gets a lot of attention.
Hmm.
Um, Bali, Portugal gets a lot of attention as well.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's strong
Portugal. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's strong bias as well because of where I serve, so like the channels I follow may mention the places that I like. But you do see that certain places attract a lot more views, and then within each category, within each like country, for example, like some countries, it's just like Bali. I mean, that's not really the case. There's Bali, but then for example, within Hawaii, you see a lot more locations that are specific to the spot rather than the word Hawaii in
Right.
itself.
Right. And all of
So
this is helping, your everyday surfer find videos that pertains more to what they're interested in at the end of the day. Right. I mean, we could talk about how this is obviously helpful for the pro surfer, the coach, the surf school, the surf resort. But for the rest of us that are just going out and we're just finding videos that might help us, this just helps dial it in a little bit more. And then if these businesses are using these kinds of techniques, then it helps them design videos and name them so that we can
yeah,
find them easier, right? And more, some of it's for entertainment, some of it's for training, but
yeah,
that's really neat. So just shifting gears to kind of other areas within surf.
yeah.
Um, you know,
Actually, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was actually gonna say it's also really useful if you're gonna get sponsorship because
Yeah,
then
I can
it's like
imagine.
a metric, and you'll be able to know like how to label things, and that affects like how much you're paying.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few pro clients, and I'm hoping they're listening to this episode. They've mentioned they have listened to the show, and so hopefully they are listening because I think this is bridging, and again, that's why it's a science. It's bridging this kind of guesswork, this anecdotal, yeah, well, whenever I put this name on my video, it gets so many, count. And they've been doing it for the last, 10, 15, 20 years, uh, a certain way, but now there's something to it. And a business that's going to sponsor a surfer is going to see numbers and they'll say, yeah, now I have a good return on my investment. I'm going to get views on my product, for example. It's a
Yeah,
great point. I really hope that they are listening right now and you know who you
yeah.
are.
It makes it a lot more concrete, right? Like you're not just saying I'm people like watching my videos. It's
Right,
like
right, right. No, it's like, hey, I'm making a business case that says, hey, there's 20,000 views every week when I do it on my video. Now you don't need to tell that sponsor how you do it. You just need to tell them the results, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's really, really great. What other areas within Surf do you think data science and AI and machine learning can help the industry or everyday surfers? I know we had a conversation about surf forecasting, and I did a
Yeah,
podcast just a little while ago on that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
how does that help surf forecasting? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so like I think I mean obviously right now like Surfline and all these different like forecasting apps are just like collecting a ton of data to be able to predict wave count. But I think the idea like the problem that we were discussing that I think we got really excited about was like this whole thing that these forecasts are kind of very generic and it's not very directed towards an individual person's performance or surfing style or capabilities, right?
Right, there's
So
biases involved, right? So what you would think is a good day for you, I'd be like, or vice versa, right? You'd be like, whoa, that's not my, yeah. So
yeah.
you brought up a great idea of having a customized kind of surf forecast. You want to kind of broaden that topic a little bit? Because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, because like I think we were talking about this problem about customization or having recommendations essentially that's like specific to you, right?
Yeah.
So if we were drawing on this whole idea of how we get personalized recommendations from all these different like search websites, essentially that is something that these forecasting new platforms can build into their system, and perhaps having like a product or there's a that I think Surfline has like a premium option, right? Where
Right.
you can subscribe and you get more detailed forecasts. But along the lines of having individualized forecasts, I mean, I think it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Like Surfline doesn't necessarily have data on whether their forecast was good for you.
Right.
And so they have a product or a product available to people where they can like opt into it. And then people could indicate whether the forecast was good, or also, if that's integrated into other applications that maybe we'll dive into this a little bit, where they talk about, their self performance, then like this forecasting app with a lot more information about what this person is seeking and what this person likes. And then they would be able to build something that's a lot more um customize a lot more useful for them, right? And it's like a chicken and egg problem because if you're having a forecast that's tailored to you, you're also more likely to share and be involved in like rating the forecast than if if it's this generic thing that you know you know
Totally.
uh
Yeah. No, that's how they're going to have to get the data because right now they're just like, is our forecast accurate for your
yeah,
location? It's just a simple question. But like what we talked about and what I talked about on the other episode was
yeah,
really how they're collecting very robust data right now through camera technologies, counting the number of waves, counting the size of the waves, counting the crowd that's in that frame.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I
And
thought that
so
was super
that
cool.
data is so much better, but it still doesn't touch on what you're talking about, which is, well, is it good for me? Right? It's
Yeah,
my personalized surf report. My goodness, that would be amazing if they started to do that. And
yeah,
it could be just an option, like you said, where they opt in and say, hey, we're going to ask you a series of questions so that every time you go surf, you can just be like, yeah, one, what kind of surfing are you trying to do? That's a great question. I didn't even think about that. You just brought up. What kind of surfing are you looking for barrels? Are you looking for longboard kind of waves? Are you looking
yeah,
for turns, right? And
yeah,
that could be a category that then they spit out forecasts just for that category for you, right? In addition to your personal opinion and what you thought the waves were, whether they were good or bad. So I love this idea for Surfline and for all the forecasting. Well, Surfline's the biggest. Let's just say that that's the one that's where they should take it. And I know a couple of my friends tried to develop software and that similar to a journal that we used to write as kids. I used to
oh
write
yeah,
down every time I'd go. This was during Surfline, but when Surfline was a phone. a toll number, a 976 surf. So you
Oh,
would have to
wow.
call and pay for the forecast. So this is really dating me, but I would call up there
Yeah.
or I would call up the San Francisco Wise surfboard shop report, which of course also I had to pay money for because back then there was we were being charged for long distance. At any rate, I'd get the information. That would be my data point. I'd write it down in my little calendar, and then I'd go surf at a particular spot, and I'd write down where I surfed. I wrote down what size I thought it was and how good it was, and the particular maneuvers that I was able to do or not do based on that
Mm,
day. And so over years and years, I mean, I had notebooks upon notebooks growing up where every time I did this. And so that was my data, right? And so for
yeah.
me, now that I'm older and now that I'm back where I grew up, I go to a surf spot and I know exactly what swell size, swell period, direction, maybe not exactly, but I have the data somewhere up here in my brain, right? And
Yeah.
so for what I like, I've already had my little engined machine learning AI in my brain based on the
Yeah.
data from when I was a kid. Surfline just needs to build that for everybody. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It would be
No,
amazing.
it's really cool. Actually, the other like data point, and this is definitely a bit on a tangent away from the idea we had, but I always find it so fascinating how like if you talk to a local who grew up and who's from the area, like they have such a good read on the wave and how it's going to behave and like, oh yeah, yeah, no, this is actually not good for you. You should go over there.
Yeah.
You know, just I just think that's so funny because it's like it's almost like you look up and you're like, yes, you know, and they like no, and it's not this. It's all like it. I think it's very like tacit knowledge, you know, and I think it'll be really cool if there was a way. And but I guess this gets a little bit away from tech. But if there's a way to embed like local knowledge, I think that's actually so powerful because as human beings, we're also such intuitive like creatures, you know.
Yes. Well, you could
And
do Surfline could do that based on the location, the surf spot. And if
yeah,
they consolidate, okay, Rob surfs at the same spot as Daphne all the time, and we're
yeah.
both involved in the opt-in, they can
Yeah.
begin to slowly build that data.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Actually, with comparison, like I mean, there are different ways to build like recommender systems. So it can be based on your history of preferences, but it can also be like matching you to similar others, and then like
Right.
you a recommendation based
So the
on
one
that.
variable that's similar between the two of us would be the location, for example, but maybe the other preferences like board type, waves
Um,
that we like to break would be, surf would be different, right?
yeah, or like stage, so like stage of development might be another.
Spatial development. Yeah, yeah. All those other things that take years to develop. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
that's fascinating. What do you think? So surf forecasting, that is, I love this. What do you think about machine learning with surfboard design or wetsuit design? Do you think that could be an application at some point?
Yeah, I think that's really useful. So I was actually thinking about like what would be really good from the for the industry
Yeah,
last night when I was and I mean I think wearable tech is just such a huge opportunity for data collection in itself because you know, people are going to be in the water anyways. So like, you know, I think we talked about this, but I also found this like article online where there are these fins which like track speed and like torque, and you can collect all sorts of different data on like climate change, you know, and
yeah,
water temperature and that. And I think it's just like wearable tech where you're able to get information about the environment or information about how someone moves. I think that's just such a huge opportunity in there as well to be able to track just first of all collect as much data as you can so you can do all sorts of different types of analysis, but then you can gear it towards things like performance, right? You can gear it towards better surfboard design for someone's body. Actually, one of the things that I think is interesting, personally quite biased. For example, it's like your feet, right? Like where do you place it on the board? Or also, what's the shape of your feet like, right? Because that gives you stability.
right.
And if that's the case, then like what types of boards may be better for you? Or that's do you need a customized board if you have a certain if your body is developed a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So that can be hugely useful for making other types of decisions. Like, do I want to buy a board that's already been pre-made, or do I want to like build one for myself? Or if it's
Right.
built for me, like what do I really want to incorporate in there? So I think there's lots of opportunities, especially with wearable tech. And
Yeah.
actually, the thing I was thinking about last night really is, especially since like, the truth is that there's also a lot of really good applications that are available across different like industries that's related to surf, right? So obviously there's data that can be collected from surfboards and wetsuits. There's data that can be collected from like video analysis. There's data from the surf forecast. There's also health stats, like now there are those rings that we have, and I think like pro surfers get all sorts of health stats tracked, right? And I think like there's a real opportunity if it would be possible to have something that could integrate the data from different places to help people like either figure out things like what kind of land-based training would be more helpful for them,
Mhm.
um, like is this a particular board that's good for you? Or do you actually want to go to this particular place to train rather than this other place, right?
Right.
And I think essentially you're able to do a lot more like useful analysis the more data you have
Yeah.
on you, but also across other people. So I think it'd be really cool if there was a way to integrate the data across different apps, and maybe that's an opportunity for like alliances between big brands. Just also like if we were to step away from the tech element and to think about surfing as an industry, right?
Hmm.
And I've been in the business school for a while, so I also think a lot about like industry dynamics between different stakeholders and players.
Yeah.
So like how could these different relationships pan out that would help everyone, right? Because
Yeah.
the more people serve, the more data you have, the more opportunities there are. So
Yeah.
I
It
was thinking
sounds
that.
to me like wearable tech is something that has brought on more data lately because it's simple. It's you have a watch or you have a ring and you can go out and you can surf. I'm thinking of colleagues at CSU San Marcos that, then do wetsuit studies by asking surveys, and that's how they collect the data. But having the fins collect data, having the surfboard collect data, having,
Yeah.
all kinds of data like force analysis, where you place your feet. I love the idea of different foot sizes. I've always talked about that,
Huh.
personally, but and how the foot size relates to the width of the board of where you're standing on it and how
Okay.
easy or hard it is to turn a board based off just that factor. I've always wanted to study that and know, well, what is it? What is my anecdotal mind thinking? Um, but it sounds like we need to create devices to capture this data first in order to then process it. This is definitely not a chicken or the egg. The
Yeah.
data needs to come first. And I guess data needs to come first in everything. And that's what you started out saying, is that when you first start something, you just collect as much data as you possibly can. And
Yeah.
that's, I think this is exciting, because we're at the beginning of really collecting this data. If you think about it,
Yeah.
like there's so much more we can do with this. I mean, all those points about getting the data from surfboards and getting data from surf spots, you can then send to a surfboard manufacturer, and they can just incorporate it into a software for their machine to then shape a board based off of your exact dimensions and the exact way
Yeah.
that you surf, and really have essentially a customized board. It doesn't eliminate the surfboard shaper. They still need to make subtle refinements, but they
Yeah.
know what the refinements should be now,
Yeah.
right? That it's width here, or it's foil, or it's concave. It's amazing. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, no, I think so. And especially like with this whole idea of I think something with like data collections also like the ease of like making data collection easy, right? And that's where
Yeah.
like wearable tech has a huge role to play, or potentially where like I mean if you think about like Google, for example, right? Like they built this huge search engine, and as a result, there's this like huge tons of data, and they're able to do all sorts of things with that. And so I guess if there was like an organization that's personally incentivized, it's useful to just kind of invest in that type of infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So if I produce surfboards and gears, I
Yeah.
don't, someone else does. It would be something that would be easy to embed in your, whatever you're doing because you can do that at scale. Or if
Yeah.
you are just starting out to do it, if you embed it early, you're just gonna have that data as a byproduct of your initial action. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, in the surf trade associations, if they that would be one body that crosses surfboards, wetsuits, clothing, leashes, like all kinds of areas. They could definitely be the source of, all right, let's put some funds towards creating tech to capture data. That would be the first step, right?
yeah. No, definitely. And it's like a growing industry too right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's also just like so exciting about the opportunity available because, more and more people are joining the sport. So there's also like a business case for it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and to your point, the healthcare. When I was working with CSU San Marcos, we were thinking of research questions specifically for healthcare because healthcare costs a lot. So if
Yeah.
we could prove a certain paddling technique reduces rotator cuff surgery
Mm.
occurrences, that's a huge savings. And so a lot of healthcare organizations would fund something like that. So that could be a potential way to start getting funding towards data capture.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Or like to build on that also like maybe something like like with the ring stuff or like health stats, like how many hours of sleep did you have before and
Mhm.
what's your likelihood of injury or your likelihood of injuring someone else. I
Or
feel
somebody else.
like
Yeah, 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 totally.
low bar questions to make everything safer for everyone. I feel
Yeah.
like it's like a good aspiration as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, it's exciting, and I want to be cognizant of your time. I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Um, Definitely keep in touch and keep me up to date on what the new stuff is out there, and I'll let you know if I come across any of my pro clients that definitely want to use your services as well.
Oh,
I definitely am promoting the use of Daphne's knowledge to anybody listening that from Surfline, from any business. You definitely want to try to use someone like Daphne, if not Daphne herself, to help you out with your business. Um, but yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining.
no, thank you so much for chatting and for making this happen. I've been having a lot of fun. It's great.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon, and we'll close out this episode of the Dropping In Surf Show.
All right,
Thanks.
sounds. Bye.